The nun whispered, "I'm not ready," but Mountain Man claimed her anyway, and it changed everything. Sister Maria had spent most of her adult life in the quiet world of the convent. She had joined when she was just 18, leaving behind the small town where she had grown up. Her family had been kind, but they were busy people, and she had always felt a little out of place. The convent had given her purpose, a place where she could serve others, learn, and live a life devoted to faith. Every morning she woke before the sun, washed her hands in cold water, and dressed in her simple habit. The routine comforted her. There was a calmness in the chants, the prayers, and the small duties she carried out each day. Maria's life was full, but it was quiet. She taught children in the village school, helped prepare meals for the other sisters, and tended the convent garden. She enjoyed these tasks, the small sense of accomplishment they brought. She loved the flowers in the garden, especially the bright yellow marigolds and the purple lavender that filled the air with a gentle scent. Sometimes she would walk slowly among the rows of vegetables, feeling the sun on her skin, listening to the wind in the trees. These moments of silence and peace were her favorite, her small treasures of happiness in a life that rarely surprised her. One summer, the village near the convent received a visitor. A man had come from the mountains, carrying little more than a worn leather bag and a bundle of firewood. His name was Eli. He was tall, with strong arms that showed he had spent years working with his hands. His face was weathered, with lines from wind and sun, but his eyes were sharp and curious. He looked out of place in the quiet village, yet there was something about him that made people notice him immediately. He moved with confidence, yet there was a softness in his voice that made people feel at ease. Maria first saw him when he stopped at the convent gate to ask for directions. She had been arranging flowers in the small courtyard, her hands busy with soil and petals. He had tipped his hat politely and asked if she could point him toward the village inn. Maria had smiled, feeling a sudden flutter in her chest that she did not understand. She gave him the directions, trying to sound calm, even though her heart felt a little strange. There was something in the way he listened, the way his eyes followed hers, that made her notice details about him she might normally have ignored. The way his boots were worn, the small scar on his hand, and the easy smile that seemed to reach his whole face. After that first meeting, Eli began appearing more often in the village. He helped with chores, carried supplies, and sometimes stayed to share a simple meal. He spoke with a kind honesty that was rare, and people trusted him quickly. When he saw Maria in the courtyard or the garden, he would pause to greet her, and she found herself looking forward to those brief moments. Their conversations started small, about the weather, the children, the flowers in the garden, but gradually they became longer and more personal. Eli spoke of the mountains, of the challenges of life away from the village, of the quiet moments when he would sit by a stream and watch the world go by. Maria listened, captivated by the stories, by the life he described, a life so different from her own. At first, Maria tried to ignore the feelings growing inside her. She reminded herself of her vows, of the life she had chosen and the rules she had promised to follow. Her heart, however, seemed to have its own mind. She began to notice Eli more than she wanted to, his presence lingering in her thoughts, even when she was busy with her duties. She would catch herself smiling when she remembered a small gesture, a nod, a laugh, a kind word. She began looking forward to seeing him, counting the days until he appeared at the village or the convent gate. Eli, too, noticed her attention. He was patient, never rushing or pressuring her. He respected her space, understanding that she lived a life different from his own. Yet he could not hide the curiosity he felt, the gentle fascination that grew every time they spoke. He admired her dedication, her quiet strength, and the kindness that shone through even in small actions. When she taught the children, he would watch from a distance, noticing the way her eyes softened, the way she encouraged each child with patience. It was a small glimpse into her world, but it left him wanting to know more. One warm evening, Maria was walking alone in the convent garden. The sun was low, casting a golden light over the marigolds and lavender. She was lost in thought, thinking about the village, the children, and the peaceful life she had always known. She did not hear Eli approaching until he spoke softly from behind a rose bush. "Good evening, Sister Maria," he said. She turned quickly, startled for a moment, then smiled. "Good evening," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart raced. They walked together in silence for a few minutes, watching the sun sink behind the hills. Eli spoke first, his voice gentle. "The garden is beautiful," he said. "You must spend many hours here." Maria nodded. "It is my favorite place," she admitted. It is quiet. I can think and pray." Eli listened, nodding thoughtfully. "I can see that," he said. "There is peace here that is hard to find anywhere else." Maria looked at him, noticing the way he observed everything around him, noticing details others missed. She felt a strange connection, as if he could see parts of her that she had hidden even from herself. After a pause, Maria whispered almost to herself, "I'm not ready." She did not know why the words came out, only that they did. She was not ready for change, not ready to face the feelings that had begun to stir inside her. She loved her life in the convent, the simplicity and certainty of it. The thought of leaving, of stepping into a world so different, frightened her. Eli looked at her, understanding, but he did not press. He simply nodded, a soft smile on his face. "I understand," he said. "I will wait." Even so, Maria could not ignore the truth. The calm life she had known was shifting. Every day brought small moments that challenged her, tiny choices that made her heart beat faster. She began to wonder what life outside the convent might feel like, what it might mean to experience the world in a way she had never imagined. She found herself thinking about Eli more and more, about his life in the mountains, about the kindness in his eyes and the way he spoke with honesty and warmth. It was confusing, and yet exciting. That summer passed slowly. Maria continued her daily tasks in the convent, teaching children, tending the garden, and praying in the quiet chapel. Yet each time Eli visited the village, each time he stopped to speak with her, her heart felt lighter and more alive. She began to understand that life could hold more than routine and comfort, that new experiences, even frightening ones, could bring joy and growth. She did not know what the future held, but she felt a small spark of hope, a small excitement that made her feel human in ways she had not felt before. By the end of the season, Maria realized that her life in the convent, while precious and sacred, could not stop her from feeling curiosity and longing. She had glimpsed a world beyond the walls of her convent, a world full of possibilities and challenges. And though she whispered again to herself, "I'm not ready," she knew deep down that life was beginning to change in ways she could not yet imagine. She was standing at the edge of a new path, and even though fear lingered, a small voice inside her whispered that perhaps this path might lead to something extraordinary. The summer slowly turned into autumn, and the air in the village grew crisp. Leaves in shades of red, orange, and gold danced down the narrow streets, and the garden at the convent began to show the first signs of change. Sister Maria worked as usual, but she felt a restlessness she could not explain. Each day she found herself thinking about Eli, the mountain man who had arrived in their quiet village months ago. He had become more than just a visitor. He had become a presence in her mind, a question she could not answer. Eli had also noticed the shift in Maria. He could sense that she was curious about life beyond the convent, that she was torn between the safety of her routine and the pull of something unknown. He did not pressure her, but he continued to visit, always polite, always patient. Sometimes he would help with small repairs around the village, carrying tools or firewood, and Maria would find herself walking alongside him to guide him. Their conversations had grown longer, deeper, and more personal. They spoke of the world outside the village, of mountains and rivers, of animals and forests, and of the struggles and joys that came with living close to nature. One afternoon, Eli arrived at the convent with a basket of apples from the market. The sweet smell of fruit filled the small garden as he approached. "Good afternoon, Sister Maria," he said, tipping his hat politely. Maria smiled, feeling the familiar flutter in her chest. "Good afternoon, Eli," she replied. He handed her the basket, and their fingers brushed for a moment. It was a small touch, but it sent a strange warmth through her, a reminder that her heart was not as calm as she had believed. As the days passed, Maria began to notice more about Eli. She noticed the way he laughed easily, the way his eyes seemed to see things others did not, and the quiet strength he carried without arrogance. He was a man shaped by the mountains, by hard work, and by life's challenges. He spoke openly about his experiences, sharing stories of storms he had survived, paths he had walked alone, and moments of beauty he had found in the simplest places. Maria listened, captivated. Each story seemed to pull her further from the life she had always known, opening her heart to a world she had never imagined. Yet Maria also felt fear. She whispered to herself often, "I'm not ready," as if saying it aloud could protect her from the unknown. She worried about leaving the convent, about stepping into a life without the certainty and safety she had always known. The idea of change was frightening, and the thought of leaving her friends and her daily routine filled her with anxiety. Still, the pull of something new, something exciting, grew stronger every day. She could not ignore it, even when she tried. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Ellie found Maria sitting in the garden, her hands folded over her lap. The air smelled of earth and fallen leaves. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Maria," he said softly, "you seem troubled today. Are you well?" She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. I am fine," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Eli sat down on the bench beside her, close enough to feel her presence, yet careful not to invade her space. For a few moments they sat in silence, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. Then Eli spoke again. "I know you are afraid," he said gently. "I can see it in your eyes. You have lived a life of order and safety, and now you are seeing a world that is different, unpredictable, and, maybe, exciting. I understand that it is frightening." Maria sighed, a small, quiet sound, and looked down at her hands. "It is more than frightening," she whispered. "It is confusing. I do not know what to do with these feelings, with this curiosity I have. I have never felt this way before." Ellie nodded, understanding. "It is normal," he said. "Life often pulls us in directions we do not expect. We feel fear, but also a longing for something more. You do not have to decide anything now. You only have to see, to feel, and to learn. I will wait. I will not rush you." His words were calm, steady, and patient. Maria felt a strange relief. For the first time in weeks, she felt that someone understood her without judgment, that someone saw her struggle and did not try to force her into a choice she was not ready to make. Over the next few weeks, Eli continued to visit the village and the convent. He helped with repairs, carried supplies, and sometimes stayed to share simple meals. Maria began to notice small changes in herself. She laughed more easily when he was around, found herself sharing little stories and thoughts she would never have spoken aloud before. He began to look forward to his visits, to the sound of his voice and the warmth of his presence. Each conversation opened new doors in her mind, new possibilities she had never considered. Despite her growing feelings, Maria still hesitated. She reminded herself of her vows, of the promises she had made, and the life she had chosen. She did not want to abandon her duties, nor did she want to disappoint the sisters she loved and respected. Every time she thought about stepping beyond the convent walls, fear gripped her heart. Yet every time she spoke with Eli, a small spark of excitement grew, a hint of something she could not ignore. She was caught between two worlds, the familiar, safe life she had always known, and the unknown, unpredictable life that Eli represented. One cold, clear morning, Maria found herself walking alone through the village market. The air was crisp, and the smell of fresh bread and roasted chestnuts filled the streets. She saw Eli speaking with the villagers, helping a woman carry a basket of vegetables. When he saw her, he smiled warmly and waved. She felt her heart skip a beat. For a moment, she froze, unsure whether to approach him or turn away. Then, gathering her courage, she walked toward him. "Good morning, Eli," she said softly. He turned fully, his eyes lighting up. "Good morning, Maria," he replied. "I was hoping to see you today." They walked together through the market, speaking about simple things, bread, fruit, the coming winter. But beneath their words there was an unspoken tension, a connection growing stronger every day. Maria realized that no matter how much she tried to focus on her convent duties, her thoughts kept returning to Eli, to the life he offered, to the freedom and adventure he represented. That evening, Maria sat alone in her room, reflecting on the weeks that had passed. She thought about her fear, her curiosity, and the strange new emotions that had taken root in her heart. She whispered again, "I'm not ready." Yet deep down she knew that readiness was not the point. Life was moving forward, and change was inevitable. She could either resist it and remain in the safety of her known world, or she could take a small step slowly, carefully, and see where it might lead. Maria finally understood that her fear was natural, but it did not have to control her. She could honor her past, her vows, and her commitments, while still allowing herself to explore new possibilities. She did not have to make a final choice yet. She only had to open her heart a little, to see and feel, and to allow life to show her what was possible. As she drifted to sleep that night, her mind replayed the moments she had shared with Eli, the gentle words, the laughter, and the quiet understanding between them. She realized that something inside her had begun to change. The life she had always known was shifting, and though she did not yet understand the full path ahead, she felt a small sense of hope and anticipation. Perhaps, she thought, she could be ready one day, but for now she would take each moment as it came, guided by curiosity, courage, and the quiet pull of a life beyond the convent walls. The first frost of winter had come to the village, covering the rooftops and the ground with a thin, sparkling layer of ice. The mornings were sharp and cold, and Maria found herself bundling in layers before walking to the chapel or tending to the garden. Life in the convent had become quieter as the seasons changed, but Maria's mind was far from calm. Her thoughts were filled with Eli, the mountain man who had entered her life months ago. His presence had become a constant in her heart, and she realized she could no longer ignore the feelings that stirred whenever she thought of him. Eli continued to visit the village, as dependable as ever. He brought firewood, helped repair the market stalls, and sometimes assisted with small repairs at the convent. His visits had become the highlights of Maria's days. She found herself watching for him on cold mornings, hoping to see his familiar figure against the snowy landscape. At first, she had been wary of these feelings, reminding herself that she had chosen a life of devotion, a life of order and safety. Yet the more she spent time with Eli, the more she realized that her heart was drawn to him in ways she had never experienced before. One afternoon, Maria was walking through the woods near the village, carrying a basket of vegetables for the sisters. The wind blew sharply, rustling the bare branches of the trees. She felt the solitude deeply, the kind of quiet that made her thoughts louder. Suddenly, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Eli approaching, his coat dusted with frost. "Maria," he called softly, "I hope I am not disturbing you." She shook her head, a small smile forming on her lips. "Not at all," she said. "It is good to see you here." They walked together among the trees, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a sense of understanding. Eli spoke first, gently, as though choosing his words carefully. "I know this is not easy for you," he said. "You have lived a life of discipline, of faith, and of service. Suddenly, life is asking you to consider something entirely new. I see your hesitation, and I understand it." Maria's heart ached at his words. How could he know the depth of her confusion, the conflict she felt between duty and desire? "I do not know what to do," she admitted quietly. "I am torn between the life I have always known and the life I could have." Eli nodded, his eyes filled with a kind understanding. "It is natural," he said. "Change is frightening. But sometimes fear is the signal that we are on the edge of growth, that something important is waiting for us just beyond the wall we have built." Maria listened, her heart racing. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that settled deep inside her. She had never considered that fear could be a guide rather than a barrier. For the first time, she felt that her feelings were not wrong, that curiosity and longing could coexist with her devotion. As the days passed, Maria found herself spending more time outside the convent walls, walking with Eli along snowy paths, listening to his stories of life in the mountains, and learning about the rhythms of the natural world. He showed her how to gather firewood safely, how to notice animal tracks in the snow, and how to appreciate the beauty of a winter forest. Every small lesson was a revelation. She began to feel a sense of independence she had never known, a confidence that grew quietly in her heart. But even as she embraced these moments, Maria struggled with guilt and doubt. Each evening she returned to the convent with a heavy heart, wondering if she was betraying the vows she had taken. She prayed often, asking for guidance, asking for clarity. Sometimes she felt a sense of peace, as if a quiet voice assured her that exploring life and love did not mean abandoning her faith. Other times her doubts returned with force, making her question every decision she had made in the past months. One particularly cold evening, a strong wind blew through the village, shaking the trees and rattling the shutters of the convent. Maria had stayed late in the garden, helping to store the last of the autumn vegetables for winter. Her hands were numb, and her cheeks were red from the cold. As she prepared to leave, she saw Eli standing at the edge of the garden, his coat pulled tight against the wind. He had a bundle of blankets and a small lantern. "Maria," he called, "I thought you might need some help carrying these inside." She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to accept. Then, feeling the warmth of his presence, she nodded. Together they carried the vegetables inside the convent, laughing at their awkwardness in the snow and cold. Once inside, they set the baskets down, and Maria realized how much she valued these moments of companionship. She felt a sense of safety and comfort with him that she had never felt with anyone else. Yet the underlying tension remained. She was aware of her growing feelings and of the decision she would eventually have to make. That night, Maria lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Eli and the life he had shown her glimpses of. She whispered again to herself, "I'm not ready." Yet she also felt a thrill of anticipation. She knew that life was moving forward, that her heart was already leaning toward change, even if she could not fully admit it. She realized that the fear she felt was not a sign to stop, but a signal that she was stepping into uncharted territory, into a world where growth and discovery awaited. A week later, the village experienced a heavy snowstorm. Roads became impassable, and the cold made travel difficult. Many villagers were trapped inside their homes, unable to go about their daily routines. Maria, however, felt a strange determination. She wanted to see Eli, to share in the quiet moments of the snowy world outside. She bundled herself tightly in her coat and walked carefully through the streets, following the tracks he had left in the fresh snow. When she found him near the edge of the forest, he smiled warmly. "You came," he said, his eyes shining. "I was worried about the snow." Maria smiled back, feeling a surge of courage. "I wanted to see you," she admitted. They walked together in the snow, their footsteps leaving parallel paths behind them. The silence of the winter forest was profound, yet it was not lonely. They spoke of small things, the beauty of the snow, the quiet strength of trees, and the stillness of winter nights. But beneath their words, a deeper connection was growing. As the storm raged around them, Maria realized that Eli had become more than a companion. He had become a guide into a world she had never known, a world full of challenges, beauty, and freedom. Her fear was still present, but it no longer controlled her. She understood that she could face the unknown with courage, that she could explore life and still honor her past. The mountain man had shown her that change was not something to fear, but something to embrace carefully, with patience and understanding. That evening, as they returned to the village, Maria felt a sense of clarity she had never experienced before. She understood that her life would never be the same, and she no longer resisted the pull of something new. She was ready to face the challenges ahead, ready to consider a future she had once thought impossible. And though she whispered once more, "I'm not ready," she knew deep in her heart that readiness was not about certainty. It was about courage, curiosity, and the willingness to step forward, even when the path was unclear. Winter had fully settled over the village, blanketing the streets, rooftops, and fields in white. The convent was quiet, the sisters busy with their indoor duties, and the world outside seemed frozen in stillness. But inside Maria, a quiet storm was growing. She had spent months thinking about Eli, the mountain man who had entered her life. His presence, his patience, and the freedom he represented had awakened feelings she had never experienced before. She knew her life was at a crossroads, but she still whispered to herself, "I'm not ready." Despite her fear, she felt the pull of a life beyond the convent walls growing stronger each day. Eli visited the village regularly, even in the harsh winter. He always brought small gifts, firewood, baskets of fruit, or warm blankets he had crafted himself. Each time he appeared at the convent, Maria's heart would race. She was drawn to him in ways she could not explain, and yet she worried about what leaving her life behind might mean. Every visit, every conversation, was a test of her courage. She wondered whether she could ever truly step into the unknown, leaving the life she had always known. One morning, Eli arrived at the convent with an unusual request. He had built a small cabin in the mountains near a frozen stream and invited Maria to visit for a short time. "I want you to see the world I live in," he said gently. "No decisions, no promises. Just a visit so you can understand what life could be like." Maria felt a rush of fear and excitement. She had never imagined leaving the convent, yet something in her heart told her that this might be the next step she needed. She hesitated, whispering to herself, "I'm not ready," but Eli's calm, patient gaze seemed to ease her worry. After several days of thought, Maria decided to accept. She packed a small bag with essentials, careful to leave the convent as she had always done, quietly, respectfully, and with a sense of duty. The morning she left, the sisters gathered to see her off. Some were surprised, others worried, but all understood that Maria was making a choice that could change her life. As she walked toward the edge of the village, Eli waited with his horse, the mountains rising behind him, strong and imposing. Maria felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. She climbed onto the horse, and together they set off toward the unknown. The journey was long and challenging. Snow crunched under the horses' hooves, and the wind bit sharply at their faces. The mountains loomed tall and silent, their peaks hidden behind clouds. Maria was unused to the cold, to the rough terrain, and to the freedom of traveling outside the familiar village streets. Yet with each passing mile, she felt a strange sense of exhilaration. She had left her safe, predictable life behind, even if only temporarily, and the world seemed to open up before her. When they arrived at Eli's cabin, Maria was struck by its simplicity and warmth. The small structure was built of wood, with a stone fireplace, a few handmade furnishings, and a view of the frozen stream below. It was far from the polished halls of the convent, but it had a beauty all its own. Eli helped her inside, bringing in firewood and lighting a fire that filled the room with warmth. Maria marveled at the cozy space, feeling a sense of comfort and safety she had not expected. It was a world so different from her own, yet she felt a strange belonging. Over the next days, Maria began learning the rhythms of life in the mountains. She helped Eli gather firewood, fetch water from the stream, and prepare simple meals. Every task was a lesson in patience, resilience, and self-reliance. She discovered muscles she had never used before, strength she had not realized she possessed. At first, she struggled with the cold and the physical demands, but Eli never rushed her. He guided her gently, offering encouragement and praise when she succeeded. Slowly, Maria began to feel capable in ways she had never known. Beyond the physical work, Maria began to see the beauty of the mountain world. She watched the sunrise over snowy peaks, listened to the river gurgling beneath a thin layer of ice, and marveled at the way the forest seemed alive, even in winter. Eli showed her how to notice animal tracks in the snow, how to find signs of life in the quietest places, and how to move with patience and observation. Every lesson was more than survival. It was a lesson in noticing, appreciating, and valuing the world in a deeper way. Maria felt a connection to life she had never experienced in the walls of the convent. Despite the beauty and new experiences, Maria's heart remained conflicted. She often thought of the sisters, of the children she taught, and of the life she had temporarily left behind. Guilt would creep in, making her question whether she was doing the right thing. At night, she would sit by the fire, her thoughts heavy. Eli never forced her to speak, but he would sit quietly beside her, a steady presence that reminded her she was not alone. "It is okay to feel fear," he said one night, "but it is also okay to feel joy. You do not have to choose one or the other yet." His words were simple, yet they carried a power that eased her troubled heart. As the days turned into weeks, Maria grew stronger, more confident, and more alive. She discovered small joys in daily tasks, the warmth of the fire, the taste of fresh bread, the quiet companionship of a shared meal. She laughed with Eli in ways she had never laughed before, feeling a lightness that had been missing from her life. The woman who had whispered, "I'm not ready," began to see that readiness was not about eliminating fear. It was about taking steps forward, even when uncertainty was present, and allowing life to unfold naturally. One morning, after a particularly harsh night, Maria and Eli ventured outside to inspect the cabin's surroundings. The world was covered in a thick blanket of snow, and the river had frozen over in places. Maria felt exhilaration and trepidation in equal measure. The mountain, so majestic and unyielding, seemed to reflect the challenge she had taken on. She realized that life required courage, patience, and the willingness to embrace both discomfort and beauty. Eli noticed her reflection in the snow, smiling warmly. "You are learning quickly," he said. Maria smiled back, feeling a sense of pride. She had faced fear, cold, and challenge, and had come through stronger. By the end of her first month in the mountains, Maria understood that her life had changed irrevocably. She had left the convent, stepped into the unknown, and discovered a side of herself she had never known. The lessons she learned went beyond physical strength. She learned patience, resilience, observation, and the joy of small victories. She discovered that love, companionship, and trust could coexist with courage and independence. The experience had transformed her in ways she could not fully describe, yet she knew her heart had expanded beyond what she had imagined possible. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the cabin's porch, Maria felt a deep sense of peace. The mountains glowed golden, the river sparkled beneath the ice, and the world felt alive in a way it never had before. She thought of the life she had temporarily left behind, of the convent, the sisters, and the children, and realized that she could honor that life while also embracing this new one. Eli's presence had not forced her to choose instantly. It had allowed her to grow, to explore, and to discover the strength and courage within herself. Maria whispered once more, "I'm not ready," but this time the words carried a different meaning. They no longer expressed fear or hesitation alone. They expressed awareness of the journey she had begun, of the changes taking place within her, and of the understanding that life's most important lessons often came from stepping into the unknown. She was no longer the same person who had watched Eli arrive at the village months ago. She had grown, learned, and discovered a world of possibility. The mountain man had shown her a path, but it was Maria's own courage and openness that allowed her to walk it. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains, melting the snow and bringing life back to the trees, rivers, and fields. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers. Maria had spent the entire winter with Eli, learning, growing, and discovering a life she had never imagined. She had faced fear, cold, and uncertainty, and she had discovered strength, courage, and a deep joy she did not know existed within her. The woman who had whispered, "I'm not ready," months ago, had changed. She was no longer afraid to step into the unknown. Eli noticed the change as well. He admired Maria's determination, her curiosity, and her willingness to embrace challenges. He had never rushed her, never forced her to make a choice, and she had grown into her own power and confidence. Together, they had built routines in the cabin, shared meals, explored the forests, and even planted a small garden that would bloom through the warmer months. Maria had learned how to chop wood efficiently, how to fish in the river, and how to navigate the snowy and rocky terrain with care. Each skill had brought her a sense of accomplishment she had never known in the quiet life of the convent. One morning, Maria woke to the sound of birds singing and sunlight streaming through the cabin window. She watched the river glinting in the distance, noticed the fresh green shoots of plants emerging through the thawing earth, and felt a sense of gratitude she had never known. Life in the mountains was not easy, but it was real, alive, and full of lessons. She thought of the convent, of the sisters and children she had left behind, and felt a gentle longing. She realized that while she loved and respected her past, she could no longer return to it in the same way. The life she had chosen before had been filled with safety and routine, but now she knew there was also freedom, adventure, and partnership. Eli entered the room quietly, carrying a basket of fresh fruit. "Good morning," he said with a smile. Maria returned the smile, her eyes shining. "Good morning," she replied. For a moment they simply stood there, looking at each other, the warm morning light filling the room. There was a sense of understanding between them that did not need words. They had shared months of learning, hardship, laughter, and growth. Their bond had deepened naturally, patiently, without force, and it had transformed both of them. After breakfast, they stepped outside to work in their small garden. Maria knelt in the soil, planting seeds for the coming season. The earth felt warm under her hands, soft and full of promise. She realized that she was no longer the timid, hesitant woman who had arrived months ago. She had grown resilient, confident, and aware of her own strength. She looked at Eli, who was clearing a small patch of rocks, and felt a wave of appreciation. He had not just guided her through physical tasks. He had shown her patience, trust, and the value of believing in herself. As the day passed, Maria and Eli spent hours talking and walking in the forest. They discussed simple things, the shape of the mountains, the behavior of animals, and the patterns of the river, but also deeper topics: life, choices, dreams, and fears. Maria spoke of her fears of leaving the convent, of stepping into the unknown, and of embracing a new life. Eli listened attentively, always respectful, always gentle. "Life will always carry risks," he said, "but it will also carry beauty, joy, and growth. You have already faced so much, and yet you are still here, learning, thriving, and choosing your own path." Maria realized that he was right. She had faced uncertainty, cold, and challenge, and she had emerged stronger and wiser. The fear she had felt so strongly in the beginning had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to move forward despite it, to embrace change and uncertainty with patience and courage. She understood now that life was not about being completely ready, but about taking steps, making choices, and trusting oneself along the way. Weeks passed, and the mountains slowly turned green. Flowers bloomed along the streams, and the forests were alive with birds and small animals. Maria and Eli continued their routine, but Maria also began to think more about the future. She knew she could not stay isolated forever. She wanted to honor her past and her commitments, but she also wanted to embrace the life she had discovered in the mountains. The balance was delicate, but Maria was ready to face it. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Maria and Eli sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the river sparkle in the fading light. "Ellie," she began softly, "I have thought a lot about my life, my past, and the choices I have made. I know I cannot return to the convent in the same way. I have changed, grown, and discovered parts of myself I never knew existed." Eli looked at her, his expression calm and understanding. "I know," he said gently. "I have seen the changes in you, the courage and the wisdom. You are ready to make your own path." Maria took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the fire inside and the cool mountain air outside. I want to continue this life, she said. I want to live fully, to explore, to grow, and to share it with you. I am ready to embrace the challenges, the joys, and everything that comes with it. Eli smiled, reaching out to hold her hand. And I will be here, every step of the way, he said. In that moment, Maria realized that the journey she had once feared was now her life. She had grown beyond hesitation, fear, and uncertainty. She had discovered strength, joy, and love in ways she had never imagined. The months that followed were filled with work, learning, and growth. Maria and Eli built a life together that was full of purpose, creativity, and discovery. They planted a larger garden, repaired and expanded the cabin, and explored the forests and mountains nearby. Maria discovered talents she had never known. Her ability to plan, organize, and care for the land, and her capacity to connect deeply with another human being. She felt a fulfillment she had never experienced in the structured life of the convent. Over time, the village came to admire her courage and resilience. People noticed the change in Maria, the strength in her movements, the confidence in her decisions, and the warmth in her presence. Children remembered her teachings fondly, and the sisters spoke of her with respect, understanding that she had followed a path of growth and self-discovery. Maria realized that life had expanded far beyond the walls she had once known. She had discovered that faith, courage, and love could coexist, and that growth often required stepping into the unknown with trust and openness. One sunny morning, Maria and Eli stood by the river, watching the water flow gently over stones. Maria reflected on her journey, the fear, the hesitation, the growth, and the courage it had taken to step forward. She thought of the woman who had whispered, "I'm not ready," months ago, and realized how far she had come. That whisper had been the beginning, a small acknowledgement of fear, but it had also been the start of a journey that led her to strength, love, and freedom. She smiled, feeling gratitude for the experiences that had shaped her, for the man who had guided her patiently, and for the life she had chosen. Eli turned to her, smiling, and said, "You have come a long way, Maria. I am proud of you, and I am grateful to walk this path with you." Maria squeezed his hand, her heart full. "And I am grateful to you," she replied. "You showed me patience, trust, and the beauty of life beyond fear. Together we can continue to learn, grow, and face whatever comes." The mountains echoed their quiet laughter, the river sparkled beneath the sunlight, and the world seemed full of promise and possibility. Maria had finally found her place, not in the safety of the convent walls, nor in hesitation, but in a life she had chosen fully, bravely, and openly. She had learned that readiness was not a state of certainty, but a willingness to face the unknown with courage, curiosity, and heart. And as she looked at the mountains, the river, and the world stretching before her, she knew that the woman who had once whispered, "I'm not ready," had become someone strong, wise, and fully alive.